Hello everyone and welcome to the third video in the series of how to make Tetris inside Unity. So in the last video we saw how to do the camera setup, the grid setup and how we can create all these prefabs for the cells. Now I'm going to take it forward by creating the block prefabs by using these cell prefabs. But before doing that, I'm going to start off by creating the grid lines grid so that it looks better. Now to create the grid lines, let's first start by creating the vertical grid lines first. And to do that, I'll drag my square sprite inside the hierarchy window. I will select my grid and copy its transform component and paste it inside my square. Now I will change its scale from 10 to 0.1. I will change its position to 0.5 and its alpha to 20 so that it is barely visible. Now I will also change its name to vertical grid line. Now I will show you another trick, but before doing that, firstly let's go inside this gizmos checkbox inside my scene window and check this show grid option to be unchecked, so that the grid lines from my scene view goes away, because that will be added confusion with the grid lines we are creating. Okay, so the trick I was talking about is using the snap settings, pardon me. uh, just make sure that it is 1 in x and 1 in y for move x and move y. Okay, now what we need to do is just duplicate the grid line and click and hold your control key and drag the newly duplicated vertical grid line towards right, and it will snap your newly created grid line by 1 units. So that is handy than just going inside the inspector and typing it out. So it becomes really handy if you just shift click both of them, duplicate it, and then do the same thing. And you can duplicate it again, and that just increases your uh, process by 2 times. So here you can see that how fast I can do this stuff. So I'm just I just created all of the grid lines just like that, or else I would have just duplicated all of them and typed out all these values one by one, which would have been a lot more time consuming. Now the next thing I would like to do is to organize this little bit. So I will go inside create. I'll create an empty game object, and also I'll reset its transform, and I will rename it Gridlines. In fact, I'm going to go inside and create another game object, vertical, and I will shift click all of them and move it inside this. Now to create the horizontal grid line, I will first create another empty game object inside vertical, sorry, inside grid lines, and I'll rename it to horizontal. And to create the first line, I will duplicate the first one of the vertical grid line and move it to horizontal. I will position it at 4.5 because that's what the center of all the horizontal grid lines along X will be. And the Y for the first horizontal grid line will be at minus 0.5. and the scale along X will be 10 units, and along the Y axis it will be zero point 0.1. So you can barely see it right now, but when I duplicate it and put it, you will see it. So I'll rename it to horizontal over here. Okay, yeah. Now I'll again do the same process. Okay, so the horizontal grid lines are also complete. Now before moving on, I am going to delete all of my cells because I already have the prefabs for all of them. Also, I'm going to make grid lines the child of the grid game object so that it's all neat and clean over at my hierarchy window. So here begins the fun part. We are going to create the prefabs for all the blocks. I'm going to start off by creating this block O because that's the easiest one. So I just created an empty game object. I reset its transform, rename it to block O, drag your cell O prefab into the hierarchy, set its position to 0, 0, duplicate it 3 times, and move all of them to get your cell square structure. Now you can select all of them and drag it inside block O to get your block O. Now I'm just going inside my prefabs folder and create another folder, and I will call it cells. I will drag all my cells inside it. I'll also create another folder to hold my blocks. I'll drag my block O inside this one. I can delete my block O. Now I'll create block I. So again, rename an empty game object to block I. From the cells folder, drag your cell I inside your hierarchy window. Set it to 0, 0. Duplicate it 3 more times. Move it to get your line structure. And now you can just put it inside block I, but before that I want to show you these images. This image uh, basically tells where should the pivot point for each of these blocks should be. So we can if we have our block I at 0, 0, it will also work fine, but then my block I will rotate about this point, which is not generally seen in Tetris. In Tetris, the third block from, I mean, it's one of the middle two cells whose center is set as the pivot point. So what I'll do is I'll select all my cells and move them down by 1 unit, and then I'll make them the child of block I. Now I'll drag my block I inside the blocks folder. Now I can delete my block I. So now it's time for block S. Let's create another empty game object, reset, rename, and drag the cell S. I will reset it so that it comes to 0, 0. Copy it 3 more times. Create the cell S structure. So as in the image, the pivot point should be here. So right now what I'm keeping constant is that I'm not moving my block from 0 comma 0. So if my block is at 0 0, I am just moving all my cells according to that. So let's just put all my cells inside my block S and drag my block S inside the blocks folder. I can delete my block S from above here. Now let's do the block Z, reset, rename, and now drag the cell Z inside my hierarchy window, duplicate 3 more times, and move all the cells to get your cell Z's block Z structure, drag and make them the child of block Z, and drag the block Z inside the blocks prefab folder. Now we can delete the block Z from hierarchy window. And let's do the block L, block L. Let's drag the cell L, reset it to 0 comma 0, and before doing it I just want to change its color to something like orange. Yeah, that looks about right, and I will apply it. Now let's duplicate it 3 more times, and let's have that cell block L structure. So the pivot point is over here, so that looks about right. Just make all the cells the child of the block L and drag the block L inside the blocks prefab folder. Now we can delete it from the hierarchy. Now let's make the block J. To make it, create an empty object, reset and rename to block J. Then drag the cell J, and okay, before duplicating, let's reset and then duplicate it 3 times, then form the J structure. So that is done. Drag them inside the block J, and as you can see, the pivot is at this point. So drag the block J inside the prefabs folder. Now you can delete it from the hierarchy window, and the block J prefab is done. Now let's create the last block, that is the block T. Again, to create it, create an empty game object, reset it, name it block T. Then drag from your cells prefab folder the cell T prefab. Before duplicating it, position it to 0 comma 0 and duplicate it 3 times, and then create your T structure, and then you can select them all and make them the child of block T. Then you can save it inside your blocks prefab folder. Now you can delete it from the hierarchy. So all the blocks in our game are finished, and that's all for right now. In the next videos we can see how these blocks can fall from the grid, how we can rotate these blocks on the press of a button, and many more things. So thank you guys for watching and have a nice day.